So what if the real reason cannabis was outlawed in the United States had almost nothing to do with public safety and everything to do with corporate profits? That's the pretty wild historical argument we're digging into today. Let's see where the evidence takes us.
And it's a really fascinating question, right? For literally centuries, industrial hemp, which, yeah, is a form of cannabis, was a total staple of American agriculture. Then, almost overnight, it's public enemy number one. So what happened? How did it flip so fast? Well, let's follow the trail of money and power, because it uncovers a story that sounds an awful lot like a corporate plot.
All right, so here's our roadmap for this whole thing. We're going to break it down into 6 parts. We'll start by setting the scene, then get into a major business rivalry, meet the key players who form this very convenient alliance, see how they basically manufactured a public panic, then look at the law that changed everything, and finally, look at the consequences we're still dealing with.
Okay, so let's set the stage. You got to picture this. We're in the 1930s. It's a time of huge economic and industrial change in America. And against this backdrop, a battle was brewing. A battle that was going to pit a traditional natural resource against a brand new man-made invention.
And really, at the heart of this entire story is a classic business showdown. On one side, you've got a plant that's been used for thousands of years. On the other side, a massive corporation with a groundbreaking new product, and most importantly, a patent to protect. So let's meet our first contender, DuPont. By the 1930s, this company was an absolute industrial titan. I mean, a powerhouse of chemical innovation. And they were right on the verge of releasing one of their most famous inventions ever, a synthetic fiber that promised to change the world, nylon.
And here's the competition, industrial hemp. Now, this is super important to understand. Hemp is a variety of cannabis, but it's not the stuff people smoke. It's an incredibly durable and versatile fiber used to make pretty much everything: rope, clothes, even paper. It was natural, it was cheap, it was widely available, and it was a direct competitor to what DuPont was trying to sell. And this chart really just lays out the stakes perfectly. You've got an ancient, natural material grown by farmers versus a brand new factory-made synthetic that's protected by a super valuable patent. DuPont had poured a fortune into nylon, and you can bet they weren't about to let good old Mother Nature get in the way of their profits. So, what's a powerful corporation to do when it's faced with a natural competitor it can't just buy out? Well, according to this theory, it finds some very powerful friends. Let's meet the alliance that was allegedly formed to protect DuPont's bottom line.
First up, obviously, we have the corporation with the crystal-clear financial motive, DuPont, which stood to make an absolute fortune from its new synthetic fiber, nylon.
Next, we bring in the money and the political muscle, Andrew Mellon. This guy wasn't just one of the wealthiest men in America, he was also the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury. That's a position with immense influence.
And finally, we have the enforcer, Harry Anslinger. He was the very first commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. You could say he was the public face of the government's drug policy, and the man who would lead the charge.
And here's where it all allegedly connects. And it's just, wow. Andrew Mellon, the Treasury Secretary, had deep financial ties to DuPont through his family's investments. And Harry Anslinger, the guy in charge of drug enforcement, he was Mellon's nephew-in-law. So you've got corporate interest, financial backing, and federal enforcement all conveniently linked by money, policy, and family. It's quite a trio.
Okay, so with motive and opportunity firmly in place, the next step was the method. How do you turn a common, useful plant into a public menace? Simple. You launch one of the most effective and terrifying propaganda campaigns in American history. Harry Anslinger became the mouthpiece, the main guy for this whole campaign. He used his official federal position to spread these wild, sensationalist, and just terrifying claims about what he called marijuana. This quote right here, it perfectly captures the extreme, over-the-top fear he was trying to pump into the public. I mean, the absurdity of the claims was just staggering. The anti-cannabis campaign blamed this plant for everything imaginable: violent crime, insanity, you name it. And the propaganda also had these deeply racist undertones, stoking fears about interracial relationships to build up public hysteria. This was the birth of the whole reefer madness era. All of this fear-mongering, all this propaganda, it was all building towards one specific goal: a new law. The climax of the whole campaign was a piece of legislation that would, for all intents and purposes, eliminate DuPont's competition. And this is the really clever, or maybe sinister part of the whole plan. The 1937 Marijuana Tax Act
didn't actually ban cannabis. No, instead, it created a system of taxes and regulations that was so complicated and so burdensome that it was virtually impossible for anyone to legally grow or have it. And critically, the law made no distinction between recreational cannabis and industrial hemp. So in one fell swoop, DuPont's biggest competitor was wiped off the map.
You know, the speed at which all this happened is what's so striking. In the very same decade that DuPont is getting ready to launch nylon, Anslinger unleashes his media blitz, and it all comes to a head with the 1937 Act. The argument here is that the timing is just too perfect to be a coincidence. It looks like a coordinated strategy.
So, the law passed. The campaign was a wild success. But what was the aftermath? Well, the consequences of this one act would ripple through the rest of the 20th century, and honestly, they're still being felt today.
The fallout was immediate, and it was massive. The once thriving American hemp industry was basically destroyed. DuPont's nylon now had a clear, open field to dominate the market. And this marked the beginning of the federal war on cannabis, a policy that would lead to the arrest and criminalization of millions upon millions of Americans for decades to come.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, the story argues that the prohibition of cannabis was never really about public health. Instead, it was a cold, calculated move where powerful corporate interests managed to shape public policy for their own financial gain.
And this whole historical account leaves us with a pretty provocative question, one that's just as relevant today as it was back then. If the desire to protect a single patent could influence nearly a century of law, how often are corporate interests quietly shaping the world we live in right now? It's a powerful thought to end on.